I think it would have been really easy to write off the original iPhone if you just obsessed over the first generation of it. Not only did it have the 30-pin connector, but it did not have a front-facing camera, so selfies, FaceTime, that wasn't really a thing. And not only was there no App Store, there was no wallpaper, there was no multitasking, and also the headphone jack was recessed, which meant you couldn't use third-party headphones with the first iPhone. You could only use Apple's custom-designed earpods that could fit that jack, but it was also restricted to just AT&T. So if you were using Verizon or, Singular at that time, you were out of luck. You had to go through AT&T, you had to buy it on contract, and it was far more expensive than anything else on the market. Not to mention the single camera, while decent on the original iPhone, still was not capable of recording video. If all you thought of was that first generation product and looked at all of its limitations, you probably wouldn't expect it to become the bestseller that it did. Which is why in today's video, I'm very excited to dive into my wish list for some of the things I think Apple should prioritize and work on for that hypothetical Apple Vision non-Pro. Maybe Vision Air, Apple Vision Plus, or just flat out call it Apple Vision, no suffix necessary, because I think Apple kind of intentionally named this first generation product Pro so that we would imply future generations won't be so crazy expensive, and maybe we'll find ways of becoming more affordable and accessible. Let's begin. So there's a few obvious requests I have out the front door, and I've mentioned this in previous streams and videos too, but the M2 chip is shipping with the Apple Vision Pro, which by no means is a slow processor, but it does feel kind of dated considering Apple Vision Pro probably won't start shipping until January 2024 at the soonest, but knowing how this is a new product category, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not quite ready by then. Apple doesn't want to commit to a firm date yet either, so very likely they might not actually start shipping them until the spring, and by the spring, like March or April of 2024, the M2 chip will be nearly 2 years old. It's already not really the latest silicon Apple's developed, and while the R1 chip is state-of-the-art and a new silicon piece that helps stitch together all of these camera feeds to create a two-perspective, high-resolution, high-frame-rate image for your eyes to look at, I think that the M2 chip is likely going to be a limiting factor with use cases long-term for Vision OS devices. It's probably good enough for the existing hardware, and I know we memed on Apple, including myself, for saying, oh, it lasts all day when plugged in. Yeah, that is weird to bring up during the battery life portion of the event, but what I think their point was that when plugged in, the device will not overheat. It's not like after 5 or 6 hours, it needs time to cool down before you can start using it again. I think that was what they were getting at, and I think the battery life as well as the overall bulkiness and size of the headset actually kind of all comes down to that M2 chip. You need to run it at a certain frequency to power the whole dang thing, and it's still on a 5nm architecture, which as of right now, yes, that's like the best in the biz, but TSMC has already publicly stated they are bringing 3nm chips into the market later this year. That will probably start with the A17 chip on the iPhone 15 series. So 3nm, of course, means it's going to be better performing and more efficient, so it doesn't consume as much power, and I think hypothetical M3 or M4 chip is going to benefit a lot to the Vision OS devices out there, because this is a device that has a lot to gain by being more efficient and having a lot less thermal throttling going on, because I think part of the reason the Vision Pro is so bulky and so expensive and so big is because it has to have that entire active cooling system. That means vents on the bottom, fans on the inside to keep that chip cool, and we've seen Apple do miraculous things with silicon in the past, transitioning away from Intel, like with the new M1 and M2 MacBook Airs. They don't need fans in the machine at all. So if we could get to that point where maybe with an M3 or maybe an M4 chip, Apple Vision would no longer require an active cooling system, that would reduce the cost, reduce the overall size of the headset and the overall weight, and on top of that, increase the battery life, because if the chip isn't pulling as much power, then you can use the same external battery pack as before and maybe get 3 or 4 hours per charge, or perhaps even start finding a way to integrate the battery pack into the headset itself. That might take a few more generations before they're ready to do that, but I do think that the silicon being on the 5nm architecture and yet the product not shipping until 2024 feels like kind of an oversight. Like, I really hope Apple changes their minds before the release and decides, oh, wait a minute, we can actually fit the M3 chip in this thing and the specs are better than we originally claimed. That would be great, but knowing Apple, it probably won't be the case. This is likely going to be a $3,500 headset shipping with 2-year-old hardware on the inside. But that, of course, is not the biggest power power draw of the overall headset. In fact, most of the price, according to display supply chain analyst Ross Young, goes to these micro OLED panels. That appears to be what's causing a lot of the heat and a lot of the expense. These have never really been built at mass before. Apple has never used micro OLED, and for good reason. This tech is overkill for practically any other use case. Seriously, like 3600 PPI, whereas most of our phones are sitting around 400 PPI. Like, the pixel density here is absurd, and the brightness that they have to achieve, you know, close to 5,000 nits, that would be completely overkill and totally unnecessary for most smartphones and laptops, and just downright unusable because they would probably use too much battery too quickly and probably just be hard to look at unless you're using it in broad daylight, and even then it would be pretty freaking bright. But the reason they're so bright in the headset is because they're going through various lenses to completely cover your vision. So when they're shooting light through these lenses to wrap your 180-degree view, a lot of that brightness is diminished. I think what might help with Apple Vision Air or the lower price version in the future is maybe toning it down on the resolution a bit. So I know Apple wants to make a good first impression with Vision OS and Apple Vision Pro, which is why they kind of went all out with it and gave it, you know, a 4K display for each eye. But pretty much everyone I've listened to talk about it has said it's the highest resolution headset they've ever seen, and I'm sure that helps with the immersion, but if you're trying to work more on affordability and accessibility, you might be better off in just saying, okay, it's not like an amazing resolution, but it's still pretty good. Like, a lot of people's reactions to the Meta Quest and Quest Pro were fairly positive, despite the resolution not being as insane as Apple Vision Pro. So trying to get the price down into a more addressable market, I think maybe they keep the micro OLED, but if you bring it down to say like 1440p per eye, still probably really high resolution, but just a tiny bit more pixelated than Vision Pro would be. Obviously, I think Apple intends on selling lower price versions of Apple Vision in the future, but I think they're gonna keep selling Vision Pro to have like their latest and greatest technology available and their most state-of-the-art tech for those who are willing to pay for it. So there's gotta be some reasons to still opt for the Vision Pro, and I think resolution would be a good one, because if you can get the pixel density down, that brings down the price, it probably brings down the power consumption, and that would also translate to less heat generated. So I don't really know much about all of the energy and watts and everything that goes into developing a mixed reality headset like this, but I think a great goal for the Apple Vision Air, or whatever they call it, which there's certain reports already claiming Apple's gonna try to have that out by the end of 2025. I think a great goal to shoot for that one is dropping the fans. Not having an active cooling system might limit the overhead of what this device can achieve in terms of raw performance, but I think if the next goal for the next generation headset would be to be $2,000 using 3nm architecture for better optimized silicon and lower resolution displays that maybe don't quite get as bright, could be a great place to start. And the last one, which I think has been on everyone's mind, which is why I saved it for last, is eyesight. Yes, this is the second official time Apple has used the term eyesight, and I get the intention of it. You know, Apple knows this is their first generation product, so they're trying to make it a good first impression, and they're trying to prove to people that this is a device that you look through, and I think they're trying to make it more socially acceptable, which is why they put that display on the outside, and it does make Apple Vision Pro far much more iconic. Definitely stands out in a crowd against other headsets when you know, oh my god, people can actually see my eyes through this thing. And if you watch the interviews about it, it's kind of fascinating how Apple developed this lenticular outward mounted display, which means that they render a different angle of your eyes for every viewpoint. So as you move around Vision Pro, the perspective of your eyes actually changes, which just makes it look a lot more transparent. And I think that's really neat and very interesting tech, but it's probably driving up the price a lot. And personally, while I get what they're trying to do to help us with immersion and social acceptance, I still think the headset is still too bulky and too new in today's day and age for it really to be that socially accepting, regardless of if it has eyesight or not. If anything, I could visualize eyesight being kind of distracting to people or creepy. You know, you can just imagine wearing it in a library or something, and someone thinks you've got a headset on, and they're like, ooh, they can't see me. And you walk up to them, and then their eyes just kind of start appearing like, hey, what are you doing in my environment? Like, I think it's just gonna be weird. It's not gonna be something people get comfortable with very quickly. And because it's such a complex, you know, lenticular display that's rendering your eyes, that increases the power draw, so that increases the heat consumption. Of course, you have a whole outward mounted display, that's gotta add to the thickness, and of course that's gonna add to the overall price of the product. So I think for Apple Vision Air, Air or Apple Vision Plus, whatever they want to call it, they could probably drop the eyesight display simply because there's already lots of us that are wearing head-mounted gear that don't have to show our eyes on the inside. A great example that we've had for centuries is sunglasses. Like, most of us wearing sunglasses like the fact that you just kind of have this neutral, flat, black glass or plastic across your face, and you can't really see where your eyes are directed. And that doesn't mean that all social interaction has been diminished. No, people can just tell by your body language and the way your head's moving around that you're awake and that you can see those around you. And while I know they can't make a headset quite as lightweight and as compact as this just yet, like, I don't think in the second generation they'll be ready to ditch the head strap that goes all the way around. I still think they'll be using micro OLED, and I still think they'll be using cameras to recreate imagery for you on the inside, but I think there's a more fashionable way to do it. And if they made it look a little bit more like the concept art we saw of Apple Reality Pro before the unveiling, I think that was a lot closer to being almost fashionable. Like, yeah, it still kind of has that ski goggle bulkiness to it, but if you get the thinness of it down and it doesn't occupy so much of your forehead, but still has some cameras on the outside, I think it might slowly start to turn into something that you could actually wear passively. Like, you could wear it in public, you could wear it on a plane, and you can use it on the go, and most people won't think it's too freaky because it's so much more slimmer, and it's a bit more fashionable than Apple Vision Pro, which, because it's a first generation product and it's got so much hardware up there, it's so bulky, it's so huge that I don't think there's gonna be a great way to try to wear that in social environments too regularly, even with eyesight. So it's cool, but frankly, that's the first thing on my list of like the chopping block things that I would exclude if I was to try to bring the price down. But at least according to supply chain analysts, I don't think that outward mounted display is actually that much. I still think most of the money is going towards those micro OLED panels, and that's where I think the real cost savings can likely be found. And not switching from M2 to M3 is inherently going to save that much money because Apple Silicon is all relatively cheap to them. They're building it at scale and they're putting it in their Macs and iPads anyway. But if you can get the chip efficient enough and running cool enough that you no longer need an active cooling system on your face, that's when I think you might be able to slim down on the package a bit. And with all of these changes, my hope is that they could get the price down to around $2,000, which I know is still crazy for a lot of you and still unreasonable. But in time, if you can further integrate this into people's lives, improve the battery life, improve the aesthetics of it so people feel more comfortable wearing it around town or around other people, then you might actually start to justify the high price by being able to say, this is one device that can be all your displays. It can be your phone, it can be your tablet, it can be your TV. And if you start to sell people on the idea that this is the last screen that you'll really need, then I think they could start to justify $2,000 or even $2,500. I think would be a lot more reasonable than where we are today. But a lot of what I'm asking might be way too out there. Maybe even with the 3nm architecture, Apple's nowhere close to being able to drop the thermal system, or maybe eyesight doesn't really save them all that much money by getting rid of it. What do you guys think Apple should do for their next generation headset that's trying to be more affordable? That's my wish list. I would love to hear yours down below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. It seriously helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. This is your Alp Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.